It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Katya Malievskaia, who's the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder of Compass Pathways. Katya is got this interesting role. She's actually in charge of innovation at Compass, and Compass is one of those we'll call new pharma companies that's only recently gone public. Her background's interesting. She received a medical degree from St. Petersburg Medical Academy in Russia, moved to the US where she did an internal medicine residency, and then worked in private practice, a little bit in academic medicine and public health for about 15 years in New York. She was a clinical instructor of medicine at Mount Sinai and a research professor at City University of New York. After moving to London in 2011, Katya worked in global health and medical philanthropy, focusing mostly on improving outcomes in maternal and child health. She founded Compass Pathways with her husband, George Goldsmith, in 2016, having experienced at firsthand the challenges in accessing evidence-based and effective mental health care for a family member. So Katya, it is great to have you here. Just really excited to hear the latest on the developments with psilocybin. Hard not to think through this for me. I mean, in meeting with you here online, the first time we met was, I think, maybe 2013, 2014, long before Compass was anywhere on the landscape. You were in the middle of struggling with a family mental health issue. And I was the director of the NIMH at the time. And you called and said, could we meet for coffee to get some advice about this personal issue? What I thought was going to be a 20-minute consultation turned into a 2-hour discussion. And I can remember vividly, you kept asking me, why don't we have better treatments? And I kept saying, it takes time. And you kept saying, we don't have time. Why aren't we trying something different? Well, it's now clear that your something different has become one of the most exciting developments in the field. And I think it's going to be of great interest for this audience to hear about the work that's happening either at Compass or through the support of Compass to build this whole field of psychedelic medicine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. I just want to make sure that you hear me well. Yes, I was asked to talk about the promise of psychedelics that are currently enjoying a comeback in media and mainstream science. But I would probably have more questions than answers, and just to maybe compensate for that, if I have to choose another tagline for my talk, I would say that it would be everyone has a story. And I think I want to start with my story and story of our family. So as you said, I am a physician. I'm a medical doctor. I was trained in internal medicine, and I'm very used to walking into the hospital, seeing a very sick patient, taking the history, examining the patient, ordering the tests, scans, consultants, formulating diagnosis, management plan, and then following the patient all the way through the discharge. So when in about 5-6 years ago, my son went to college and developed severe depression and OCD, I thought, how hard could it be? I wrote a lot of prescriptions for antidepressants. We'll whip it into shape in no time. And unfortunately, the more he was treated, the worse he was getting. And he was treated in some of the best centers in the US. So there was not the medical model or the care model that I knew and was trained in. So I dropped everything and I started looking for solutions. And I talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people. And in this path, I think our story really paled in comparison to what I've learned. I've seen, shame and guilt of people not being able to be present for their families and their children, and young people missing on professional, educational, and other opportunities, social opportunities, relationships, friendships. I saw poor efficacy outcomes. I saw struggles with severe side effects, poor access to quality care. And in the US in particular, high out-of-pocket expenses. I remember talking to a very successful, young, beautiful, very put together woman who said to me, I spent more on my mental health care than on Harvard Business School. But what if you don't have these resources? So what does it tell you about people who have no resources? So I think in this journey, what I've learned is that everyone was affected, regardless of their income, socioeconomic status, education, or geography. I remember sitting in the consult room with some of the prominent psychopharmacologists in the US, and they were shaking their heads and they were saying, your son may not get better. And I think I was the only one in the room who refused to accept this, not only for our family, but also for everyone who I met on this path. So I just kept pushing. And in one of my sleepless nights, I read a small study from University of Arizona where 9 patients with severe OCD took synthetic psilocybin and all got better the next day. Now, if you have OCD or you know someone with OCD, do not try it at home. It was a really small study, uncontrolled, short follow-up. But given the devastation that I saw, the signals were something that we could not ignore. So we started looking into this. And so psilocybin is literally, psilocybin is the class of drugs that is referred to as psychedelics. That literally means mind manifesting. And so people who take psychedelics, or psilocybin in particular, can experience changes in perception, cognition, mood, very strong experiences with strong emotional undercurrents ranging from blissful to terrifying. So such experiences, so this kind of drugs were used in indigenous societies for centuries, and such experiences in indigenous societies and traditional societies were considered sacred, but by Western standards, they were considered undesirable, unusual, and difficult to manage. And so for the long period of time, this drugs were stigmatized and, really misunderstood. And now with the advancement of science and, research methods, and particularly with the invention of fMRI, now we can kind of demystify these experiences and actually understand, what's going on, why this drugs could have therapeutic potential. So there are, specifically about psilocybin is an active ingredient in magic mushrooms and was used in a number of studies. And what we understand about it, mechanism of action is there are 2 parts. There's a purely pharmacological effect when psilocybin works on serotonin system, and the serotonin receptors are widely spread. And when psilocybin attaches to serotonin receptors, it triggers the neurochemical cascades that are now thought to be responsible for acute, more immediate antidepressant and other beneficial effects of psilocybin. But then there is another part of it. There is a subjective mechanism of change. So when psilocybin activates a particular type of receptors called 5-HT2A receptors, these receptors are particularly densely expressed in the system of connections in the brain called default mode network. And that's not an anatomical structure. It's basically the structure that it's a system of connections that is formed based on one's life experience, learnings, environmental influences. So it's just a collection of your patterns, if you will, and it's really connected to your sense of self. So when psilocybin downregulates this system of connections, this corresponds to the experience that it's at its extreme is described as unitive or ego dissolution. But even in milder versions, in milder experiences, this allows patients to kind of get out of clutches of their egos or their sense of self, and look at their life situation, their conflicts from new perspective, and rewrite their narratives. So patients when this default mode network gets downregulated, patients, as I said, are able to generate their own insights because their pre-existing patterns are no longer at play. And so they generate their own solutions. They, this experience changes their relationship with symptoms, and it's really empowering. That's the experience that patients value the most. And this is the experience that we now think leads to long-lasting change. So psilocybin was explored, its mechanism of action and its effects were explored in a number of small academic studies for a variety of indications ranging from existential distress in cancer patients to depression, anxiety, and addiction. But this transdiagnostic in the studies, all the studies showed a similar pattern of response regardless of the diagnosis. This transdiagnostic pattern showed rapid, immediate relief of symptoms that was sustained for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes forever. And about if that is not enough, the value of this experience. In one of the Hopkins studies, 70% of participants were asked to rate this experience for its meaningfulness, and 70% of participants rated it in the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their lives, up there on par with birth of their children, death of their parents, their marriages. So it helps to reshape your narrative, and everyone has a story. So the question then becomes, if these experiences and this approaches have such a potential and show promising signals, how do you bring these ineffable experiences to hundreds of millions of patients? How do you turn these discoveries, these promising signals, into innovation that creates value for everyone, but mostly for patients and health systems? And more importantly, how do you make them available, accessible, regardless of people's ability to pay for them? So we asked at Compass, we've asked this question the regulators and payers in 9 different countries. And regulators and payers are often seen by pharmaceutical industry as hurdles on the path to market. But we were really surprised how informed, collaborative, and engaged all the regulators were, perhaps because, again, everyone has a story and we are all in it together. So it's very easy to get sort of enchanted with the power of psychedelic experiences and the promise. And right now, psychedelics seem to be a solution for anything from climate change to rebuilding democracy, to bad divorce. But really, in order for us to make a meaningful change for patients and change patient experience for mental health, I think we really need to stay sober. We need to maintain scientific equipoise. We need to follow the principles of socially responsible science, and we must follow the data, not to get ahead of it. So in our conversations with regulators, the FDA gave our program a breakthrough therapy designation, which means that FDA viewed the program and the promise of this approach as significantly better than existing therapies, and they're willing to spend time and resources with us on designing a clinical development program that would meet their requirements should the science hold. So what does our program look like today? So we just completed, last year we've completed the healthy volunteer study, 89 participants, a healthy volunteer. It was randomized, a randomized control study, and which showed that our compound was generally well tolerated and there were no safety concerns in short or long term. And we're currently in phase 2 dose finding study at 20 sites in multiple countries, including US and multiple sites in Europe. So I want to tell you a little bit about what patients' journey looks like in our study when patients join our study. There is a, I think, Tom, picture of the typical treatment room. So because of this unusual subjective experiences, psilocybin can only be administered by a specially trained therapist in a clinically controlled environment. So when patients join the study, they meet with a therapist, with a specially trained therapist who will follow them throughout the study. They meet for a couple of hours to learn about each other, but mostly to form this sense of trust. So a patient is confident that the therapist is competent and has their best interest at heart. On the day of the session, patients come into the room. They, as you see, the room is non-clinical. We turn a clinical environment into a very soothing, calming environment. And patients take the drug. They put on the eye shades and lie down on the couch and listen to a specially designed playlist that follows the pharmacodynamic of the drug. And majority of patients remain deeply in their experience for the duration of the session, and very little support is needed for, on part of the therapist. And when the acute effects of the drug wear off, patients are assessed for safety and go home and come back the next day for the process called integration. They meet again with the therapist to talk about their experiences, their insights, and to make a plan how to integrate, their insights into their lives moving forward. So we pay particular attention to selection and training of therapists. We've also created a specific model of psychological support that is transdiagnostic, which means that the model could be used not only in patients with depression, but with anyone in psychedelic session to ensure safe and meaningful experiences. And both the training program and the psychological support model were reviewed and approved by the FDA. So that's a little bit about us and what we're doing. And just to close off, back to where we started. So my son did get better. He graduated from college. He's in a long-term relationship. He has a rewarding job. All that was unthinkable 6 or 7 years ago. We were fortunate. But this is just a story of one person, one family. We are aware that there are hundreds of thousands of families that are not that fortunate. And there is no overnight miracle cure. The mushrooms are not magic, and we need to be sober and we need to follow the data. And the need is huge. It's complex, it's urgent. And it's a highly technical climb to get to the world where everyone has immediate access to high quality, precision, preventative models of mental health care. And we will continue doing our best to accelerate patients' access to evidence-based innovation in mental health across the world. And we as a family walk that path. And we as a company are now walking this path. And so hopefully you'll tell a different story. Thank you.
Thank you, Katya. You know, it's so great to have you put this into a personal context and for you to hear for all of us to hear the origin story of how this came about. It's just absolutely fascinating. Lots of questions, and we don't have a lot of time, but let me just jump in on a couple of things. I think a really key question for a lot of us is to, there's so much enthusiasm and so much excitement around psychedelics. I'm curious what you worry about, what keeps you up at night when you think about this process that we're all involved with on the randomized clinical trial regulatory front. What are you looking at that you are worried about?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think that, as I said, it's very easy to get carried away with the promise of psychedelics and, the fact that they've been used for centuries in recreational setting. But I think if we look at it from the perspective of mental health, I think there is a group there is a population with severe mental illness. There are people with treatment-resistant conditions, depression, OCD, eating disorders. And I think that my worry is that these patients should not these patients look at innovation as one of their last resorts, a last hope. And I think we need to be very careful how we position, how we describe the data, how we describe the promise of psychedelics in treatment of these disorders. This is a vulnerable population that's been suffering for decades, and we need to be very, very careful. We need to be absolutely sober with approach to study these drugs. We need to understand, all the safety parameters around it. We need to understand what works for whom and when. So I think we're in a good place, but I think we have a lot of work to do.
As you said, it's a technical climb. There's lots to do. And I think that's an important message to convey, that there is a process and the science will take us there, but it's not a quick process. The other question, which I think is so important, implied in what you said, you said in your remarks, these mushrooms aren't magic, that there's a whole other piece to this process that has to do with not just the chemistry of the pill, the psilocybin, but has to do with kind of a relational piece. It's really interesting the way you've talked about this as psychedelic therapy or psilocybin psychotherapy. Could you say a little bit more about that? How do you think, because generally we think about drug development or we think about psychotherapy, those are two different worlds that usually don't come together either in research or in treatment. The FDA has no interest in psychotherapy. They only do the pill. So when you think about this as in this world of R&D, how do you factor that in? How does that work?
Yeah, that is definitely a methodological challenge, but it's the methodological challenge that is worth thinking about. So if you look at early small studies done by, in academic centers, it's very clear that a particular type of experience correlates with better clinical outcomes. So it's not to say that people who don't reach this unusual, unitive experience, non-dual experience, don't have clinical benefits. But there is something about these experiences that matter. So first of all, we need to understand the neurophysiological correlates of these experiences. What exactly is therapeutic, both, from biological and subjective perspective. And then we need to understand how we support people, and is there a way to support people in having these experiences in a more predictive way, if these experiences in fact are correlate, or if there is a causality between these experiences and better clinical outcomes. So I think that experience piece, I think it's the first time in kind of clinical development, or maybe I'm not aware, but I think it's the first time when we really cannot look away from patients' subjective experience and what it means for their recovery, for their remission, and how do we understand that, and how do we support patients better? I think the issue of supporting the method, the way these patients need to be supported, remains to be seen. Again, there is the whole new piece of research on therapy optimization when it comes to psychedelic medicine in general. But I think it's a very exciting piece of research, but that's not what is being done now. As I said, that our method is transdiagnostic and non-directive to provide a minimum safe support so people can have safe and meaningful session. But therapy optimization does have a role to play.
Terrific. Katya, thank you so much for being with us today. I know a lot of people were interested in hearing this part of the summit because it is one of the hot areas in mental health.
Yes.
It's great to have you take us through it. And
Thank you.
good luck with all of this.